The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross, Book 2, Chapter 27, which treats of the second kind of revelation, namely, the disclosure of hidden secrets, describes the way in which these may assist the soul toward union with God, and the way in which they may be a hindrance, and how the devil may deceive the soul greatly in this matter. We were saying that the second kind of revelation was the manifestation of hidden mysteries and secrets. This may come to pass in two ways. The first, with respect to that which God is in himself, wherein is included the revelation of the mystery of the most holy Trinity and unity of God. The second is with respect to that which God is in his works, and herein are included the other articles of our Catholic faith and the propositions deducible from them, which may be laid down explicitly as truths. In these are included and comprised a great number of the revelations of the prophets, of promises and warnings of God, and of other things which have happened and shall happen concerning this matter of faith. Under this second head, we may also include many other particular things which God habitually reveals, both concerning the universe in general, as also in particular concerning kingdoms, provinces, and states, and families and particular persons. Of these we have examples in abundance in the divine writings, both of the one kind and of the other, especially in all the prophets, wherein are found revelations of all these kinds. As this is a clear and plain matter, I will not here spend time in quoting these examples, but will only say that these revelations do not come to pass by word alone, but that God gives them in many ways and manners, sometimes by word alone, sometimes by signs and figures alone, and by images and likenesses alone, sometimes in more than one way at once, as is likewise to be seen in the prophets, particularly throughout the Apocalypse, where we find not only all the kinds of revelation which we have described, but likewise the ways and manners to which we are here referring. As to these revelations which are included under our second head, God grants them still in our time to those whom he wills. He is wont, for example, to reveal to some persons how many days they still have to live, or what trials they are to suffer, or what is to befall such and such a person or such and such a kingdom, etc. And even as regards the mysteries of our faith, he will reveal and expound to the Spirit the truths concerning them, although, since this has already been revealed once, it is not properly to be termed revelation, but is more correctly a manifestation or explanation of what has been revealed already. In this kind of revelation, the devil may meddle freely, for as revelations of this nature come ordinarily through words, figures, and likenesses, etc., the devil may very readily counterfeit others like them, much more so than when the revelations are in spirit alone. Wherefore, if with regard to the first and the second kind of revelation which we are here describing, as touching our faith, there be revealed to us anything new or different, we must in no way give our consent to it, even though we had evidence that it was spoken by an angel from heaven. For even so says St. Paul in these words, Licet nos, gut angelus de caelo evangelizet vobis praeterquam quod evangelizavimus vobis, anathema sit. Which signifies, even though an angel from heaven declare or preach unto you anything else than that which we have preached unto you, let him be anathema. Since then there are no more articles to be revealed concerning the substance of our faith than those which have already been revealed to the Church, not only must anything new which may be revealed to the soul concerning this be rejected, but it behooves the soul to be cautious and pay no heed to any novelties implied therein, and for the sake of the purity of the soul, it behooves it to rely on faith alone. Even though the truths already revealed to it be revealed again, it will believe them not because they are now revealed anew, but because they have already been sufficiently revealed to the Church. Indeed, it must close its understanding to them, holding simply to the doctrine of the Church, and to its faith, which, as St. Paul says, enters through hearing. And let not its credence and intellectual assent be given to these matters of the faith which have been revealed anew, however fitting and true they may seem to it, if it desire not to be deceived. For in order to deceive the soul and instill falsehoods into it, the devil first feeds it with truths and things that are probable, in order to give it assurance, and afterwards to deceive it. He resembles one that sews leather with a bristle, first piercing the leather with the sharp bristle, after which enters the soft thread. The thread could not enter unless the bristle guided it. And let this be considered carefully. For even were it true that there was no peril in such deception, yet it greatly behooves the soul not to desire to understand clearly things that have respect to the faith, so that it may preserve the merit of faith in its purity and entirety, and likewise that it may come in this night of the understanding to the divine light of divine union. And it is equally necessary to consider any new revelation with one's eyes closed, and holding fast the prophecies of old. For the Apostle St. Peter, though he had seen the glory of the Son of God after some manner on Mount Tabor, wrote in his canonical epistle these words, Et habemus firmiorum propheticum sermonem, qui bene factitis attendentes, etc., which is as though he had said, although the vision that we have seen of Christ on the Mount is true, the word of the prophecy that is revealed to us is firmer and surer, and if you rest your soul upon it, you do well. And if it be true that for the reasons already described it behooves the soul to close its eyes to the aforementioned revelations which come to it, and which concern the propositions of the faith, how much more necessary will it be neither to receive nor give credit to other revelations relating to different things, wherein the devil habitually meddles so freely that I believe it impossible for a man not to be deceived in many of them, unless he strive to reject them. Such an appearance of truth and security does the devil give them. For he brings together so many appearances and probabilities in order that they may be believed, and plants them so firmly in the sense and the imagination, that it seems to the person affected that what he says will certainly happen, and in such a way does he cause the soul to grasp and hold to them, that if it have not humility, it will hardly be persuaded to reject them and made to believe the contrary. Wherefore, the soul that is pure, cautious, simple, and humble must resist revelations and other visions with as much effort and care as though they were very perilous temptations. For there is no need to desire them. On the contrary, there is need not to desire them, if we are to reach the union of love. It is this that Solomon meant when he said, "What need has a man to desire and seek things that are above his natural capacity?" As though we were to say, he has no necessity, in order to be perfect, to desire supernatural things by supernatural means, which are above his capacity. And as the objections that can be made to this have already been answered in the 19th and 20th chapter of this book, I refer the reader to these, saying only that the soul must keep itself from all revelations in order to journey in purity and without error in the night of faith to union. Chapter 28, which treats of interior locutions that may come to the spirit supernaturally, says of what kinds they are. The discreet reader has ever need to bear in mind the intent and end which I have in this book, which is the direction of the soul through all its apprehensions, natural and supernatural, without deception or hindrance, in purity of faith, to divine union with God. If he does this, he will understand that although with respect to apprehensions of the soul and the doctrine that I am expounding, I give not such copious instruction, neither do I particularize so much or make so many divisions as the understanding perchance requires, I am not being over brief in this matter. For with respect to all this, I believe that sufficient cautions, explanations, and instructions are given for the soul to be enabled to behave prudently in every contingency, outward or inward, so as to make progress. And this is the reason why I have so briefly dismissed the subject of prophetic apprehensions and other subjects allied to it. For there is so much more to be said of each of them, according to the differences in the ways and manners that are wont to be observed in each, that I believe one could never know it all perfectly. I am content that, as I believe, the substance and the doctrine thereof have been given, and the soul has been warned of the caution which it behooves it to exercise in this respect, and also concerning all other things of the same kind that may come to pass within it. I will now follow the same course with regard to the third kind of apprehension, which we said was that of supernatural locutions, which are apt to come to the spirits of spiritual persons without the intervention of any bodily sense. These, although they are of many kinds, may, I believe, all be reduced to three, namely, successive, formal, and substantial. I describe as successive certain words and arguments which the spirit is wont to form and fashion when it is inwardly recollected. Formal words are certain clear and distinct words which the spirit receives, not from itself, but from a third person, sometimes when it is recollected, and sometimes when it is not. Substantial words are others which also come to the spirit formally, sometimes when it is recollected, and sometimes when it is not. These cause in the substance of the soul that substance and virtue which they signify. All these we shall here proceed to treat in their order. Chapter 29, which treats of the first kind of words that the recollected spirit sometimes forms within itself, describes the cause of these, and the profit and harm there may be in them. These successive words always come when the spirit is recollected and absorbed very attentively in some meditation, and in its reflections upon that same matter whereon it is thinking, it proceeds from one stage to another, forming words and arguments which are very much to the point, with great facility and distinctiveness, and by means of its reasoning discovers things which it knew not with respect to the subject of its reflections, so that it seems not to be doing this itself, but rather it seems that another person is supplying the reasoning within its mind, or answering its questions, or teaching it. And, in truth, it has good cause for thinking this, for the soul itself is reasoning with itself, and answering itself, as though it were two persons convening together. And in some ways this is really so, for although it is the Spirit itself that works as an instrument, the Holy Spirit oftentimes aids it to produce and form those true reasonings, words, and conceptions. And thus it utters them to itself as though to a third person. For as at that time the understanding is recollected and united with the truth of that whereon it is thinking, and the divine Spirit is likewise united with it in that truth, as it is always united in all truth, it follows that when the understanding communicates in this way with the divine Spirit by means of this truth, it begins to form within itself successively those other truths which are connected with that whereon it is thinking, the door being opened to it and illumination being given to it continually by the Holy Spirit, who teaches it. For this is one of the ways wherein the Holy Spirit teaches. And when the understanding is illumined and taught in this way by this master, and comprehends these truths, it begins of its own accord to form the words which relate to the truths which are communicated to it from elsewhere. So that we may say that the voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. And one that is in this condition will be unable to believe that this is so, but will think that the sayings and words come from a third person. For such a one knows not the facility with which the understanding can form words inwardly, as though they came from a third person, and having reference to conceptions and truths which have in fact been communicated to it by a third person. And although it is true that in this communication and enlightenment of the understanding no deception is produced in the soul itself, nevertheless deception may and does frequently occur in the formal words and reasonings which the understanding bases upon it. For inasmuch as this illumination which it receives is at times very subtle and spiritual, so that the understanding cannot attain to a clear apprehension of it, and it is the understanding that, as we say, forms the reasonings of its own accord, it follows that those which it forms are frequently false, and on other occasions are only apparently true, or are imperfect. For since at the outset the soul began to seize the truth, and then brought into play the skillfulness or clumsiness of its own weak understanding, its perception of the truth may easily be modified by the instability of its own faculties of comprehension, and will act all the time exactly as though a third person were speaking. I knew a person who had these successive locutions. Among them were some very true and substantial ones concerning the most holy sacrament of the Eucharist, but others were sheer heresy. And I am appalled at what happens in these days, namely, when some soul with the very smallest experience of meditation, if it be conscious of certain locutions of this kind in some state of recollection, at once christens them all as coming from God, and assumes this is the case, saying, "God said to me," "God answered me," whereas it is not so at all. But as we have said, it is for the most part they who are saying these things to themselves. And over and above this, the desire which people have for locutions, and the pleasure which comes to their spirits from them, lead them to make answer to themselves, and then to think that it is God who is answering them and speaking to them. They therefore commit great blunders unless they impose a strict restraint upon themselves, and unless their director obliges them to abstain from these kinds of reflection. For they are apt to gain from them mere nonsensical talk and impurity of soul, rather than humility and mortification of spirit, if they think, "This was indeed a great thing," and "God was speaking," whereas it will have been little more than nothing, or nothing at all, or less than nothing. For if humility and charity be not engendered by such experiences, and mortification, and holy simplicity, and silence, etc., what can be the value of them? I say, then, that these things may hinder the soul greatly in its progress to divine union, because if it pay heed to them, it is led far astray from the abyss of faith, where the understanding must remain in darkness, and must journey in darkness, by love and in faith, and not by much reasoning. And if you ask me why the understanding must be deprived of these truths, since through them it is illumined by the Spirit of God, and thus they cannot be evil, I reply that the Holy Spirit illumines the understanding which is recollected, and illumines it according to the manner of its recollection, and that the understanding cannot find any other and greater recollection than in faith, and thus the Holy Spirit will illumine it in nothing more than in faith. For the purer and more refined in faith is the soul, the more it has of the infused charity of God, And the more charity it has, the more is it illumined, and the more gifts of the Holy Spirit are communicated to it. For charity is the cause and the means whereby they are communicated to it. And although it is true that in this illumination of truths the Holy Spirit communicates a certain light to the soul, this is nevertheless as different in quality from that which is in faith, wherein is no clear understanding, as the most precious gold is from the basest metal. And with regard to its quantity, the one is as much greater than the other as the sea is greater than the drop of water. For in the one manner there is communicated to the soul wisdom concerning 1 or 2 or 3 truths, etc. But in the other there is communicated to it all the wisdom of God in general, which is the Son of God, who communicates himself to the soul in faith. And if you tell me that this is all good, and that the one impedes not the other, I reply that it impedes it greatly, if the soul sets store by it. For to do this is to occupy itself with things which are clear and of little importance, yet which are sufficient to hinder the communication of the abyss of faith, wherein God supernaturally and secretly instructs the soul, and exalts it in virtues and gifts in a way it knows not. And the profit which these successive communications will bring us cannot come by our deliberately applying the understanding to them, for if we do this, they will rather lead us astray. Even as wisdom says to the soul in the songs, "Turn away thine eyes from me, for they make me to fly away." That is to say, they make me to fly far away from thee, and to set myself higher. We must therefore not apply the understanding to that which is being supernaturally communicated to it, but simply and sincerely apply the will to God with love. For it is through love that these good things are communicated, and through love they will be communicated in greater abundance than before. For if the ability of the natural understanding or of other faculties be brought actively to bear upon these things which are communicated supernaturally and passively, its imperfect nature will not reach them, and thus they will perforce be modified according to the capacity of the understanding, and consequently will perforce be changed. And thus the understanding will necessarily go astray, and begin to form reasonings within itself, and there will no longer be anything supernatural or any semblance thereof, but all will be merely natural and most erroneous and unworthy. But there are certain types of understanding so quick and subtle that when they become recollected during some meditation, they invent conceptions, and begin naturally and with great facility to form these conceptions into the most lifelike words and arguments, which they think, without any doubt, come from God. Yet all the time they come only from the understanding, which, with its natural illumination, being to some extent freed from the operation of the senses, is able to effect all this and more without supernatural aid. This happens very commonly, and many persons are greatly deceived by it, thinking that they have attained to a high degree of prayer and are receiving communications from God, wherefore they either write this down or cause it to be written. And it turns out to be nothing, and to have the substance of no virtue, and it serves only to encourage them in vanity. Let these persons learn to be intent upon nothing save only upon grounding the will in humble love, working diligently, suffering, and thus imitating the Son of God in his life and mortifications. For it is by this road that a man will come to all spiritual good, rather than by much inward reasoning. In this type of locution, namely in successive interior words, the devil frequently intervenes, especially in the case of such as have some inclination or affection for them. At times when such persons begin to be recollected, the devil is accustomed to offer them ample material for distractions, forming conceptions or words by suggestion in their understanding, and then corrupting and deceiving it most subtly with things that have every appearance of being true. And this is one of the manners wherein he communicates with those who have made some implicit or expressed compact with him, as with certain heretics, especially with certain heresiarchs, whose understanding he fills with most subtle, false, and erroneous conceptions and arguments. From what has been said, it is evident that these successive locutions may proceed in the understanding from three causes, namely, from the divine Spirit, who moves and illumines the understanding, from the natural illumination of the same understanding, and from the devil, who may speak to the soul by suggestion. To describe now the signs and indications by which a man may know when they proceed from one cause and when from another would be somewhat difficult, as also to give examples and indications. It is quite possible, however, to give some general signs, which are these. When in its words and conceptions the soul finds itself loving God, and at the same time is conscious not only of love, but of humility and reverence also, it is a sign that the Holy Spirit is working within it. For whenever he grants favors, he grants them with this accompaniment. When the locutions proceed solely from the vivacity and brilliance of the understanding, it is the understanding that accomplishes everything without the operation of the virtues, although the will, in the knowledge and illumination of those truths, may love naturally. And when the meditation is over, the will remains dry, albeit inclined neither to vanity nor to evil, unless the devil should tempt it afresh about this matter. This, however, is not the case when the locutions have been prompted by a good spirit, for then, as a rule, the will is afterwards affectioned to God and inclined to doing good. At certain times, nevertheless, it will happen that although the communication has been the work of a good spirit, the will remains in aridity, since God ordains it so, for certain causes which are of assistance to the soul. At other times the soul will not be very conscious of the operations or motions of those virtues, yet that which it has experienced will be good. Wherefore I say that the difference between these locutions is sometimes difficult to recognize, by reason of the varied effects which they produce. But these which have now been described are the most common, although sometimes they occur in greater abundance, and sometimes in less. But those that come from the devil are sometimes difficult to understand and recognize. For although it is true that as a rule they leave the will in aridity with respect to the love of God, and the mind inclined to vanity, self-esteem, or complacency, nevertheless they sometimes inspire the soul with a false humility and a fervent affection of the will, rooted in self-love, so that at times a person must be extremely spiritually minded to recognize it. And this the devil does in order the better to protect himself, for he knows very well how sometimes to produce tears by the feelings which he inspires in a soul, in order that he may continue to implant in it the affections which he desires. But he always strives to move its will so that it may esteem those interior communications, attach great importance to them, and, as a result, give itself up to them, and be occupied in that which is not virtue, but is rather the occasion of losing virtue that the soul may have. Let us remember, then, this necessary caution, both as to the one type of locution and as to the other, so that we may not be deceived or hindered by them. Let us treasure none of them, but think only of learning to direct our will determinedly to God, fulfilling his law and his holy counsels perfectly, which is the wisdom of the saints, and contenting ourselves with knowing the mysteries and truths with the simplicity and truth wherewith the Church sets them before us. For this is sufficient to enkindle the will greatly, so that we need not pry into other deep and curious things, wherein it is a wonder if there is no peril. For with respect to this, St. Paul says, "It is not fitting to know more than it behooves us to know." And let this suffice with respect to this matter of successive words. End of chapter 29.